Welcome to another POFcast. I'm Rob Lancaster.
I'm Menagano Kape.
And I'm David Vincent.
So here we are. Welcome back from Bish Bish. Menagano, you are finally...
Happy to be back.
Very good. Today we've got a super interesting and pertinent topic, which is localization, and then the relationship between that and value for money. A little bit of discussion around these things. But first, as we are always doing on the podcast now, a reflection on peace from the last week.
Yeah, so the reflection on peace for me, so I just came back to Juba after a few weeks away. And so this morning I went for a walk. I couldn't sleep. So I went for a walk and I could see the increasing number of people that are basically exercising, running or walking. And quickly I relate this to peace because in other parts of South Sudan, let's say when you go for a field work, just that aspect of running alone, when people see you running, they're related to something completely different.
Yeah.
That something is wrong.
Mm.
So, and that's often when I go to the field, I don't do running because I feel like it's, I've got to trigger some people.
Yeah.
So it was quite nice to see a number of people this morning, like 5 a.m. in Juba on the road. That sense of peace.
Interesting. My reflection is on the airstrike that happened in Warrap last week, government-led airstrike to deter youth mobilization or an attempt to attack another community. So I was just thinking about that action by the government. While it is an action to deter violence and to ensure stability in these areas, there are also other interventions at the grassroots level, which focuses more on dialogue, on bringing communities together. I cannot say it has successfully managed to bring an end to the conflict, but also at the same time, the efforts of the government that uses force has not also successfully addressed the issue of violence and stability. So I was thinking, at what point do we meet the grassroots-led effort and also the government-led effort? Could that be the approach that would possibly deliver peace if we find a place where we can meet and come up with a way forward that makes sense to the community, that addresses the root causes of whatever is causing instability in some of these regions? So yeah, I think it's a very difficult topic to think and to talk about, especially in our current context.
You've gone much deeper than my example. So we often talk about how free handouts don't necessarily create peace. We sometimes think that by providing things, and so I was reflecting in the last week since coming back from Australia with my supply of Tim Tams, how that's created war in our office. And so maybe we can have a future episode dedicated to mediation efforts for our team. Around the equitable distribution of chocolate in the office.
Absolutely.
Challenging questions. An equally challenging question is, or many questions relating to localization. And then we're tying this in today's conversation in also with value for money. And it's probably worth saying at the outset that localization can on the one hand be something that's just talked about in vague, meaningless terms, or on the other hand, it can become something that is, in a sense, a difficult conversation to have because it gets to questions of the relevance and contribution of those of us like myself as internationals, and also the preparedness and capability of national organizations and actors to engage around these questions. So we're going to try and dive in as much as we can to grapple with these questions today and try and be as specific as possible about what the conversation is about, what it could be about, and how we can potentially make some progress. So I'm interested in what thoughts come to mind for the two of you around the definition of localization and the associations with it. Maybe just to kick off and for you to respond to, we often in programming, we have a kind of quantitative idea of localization. So are we supporting a national NGO? Tick. Do their profiles say they can do what the project is doing? Tick. Do they have the required policies and systems in place? Tick. Or cross, whatever. Can they access hard to reach areas? Are their budgets economical? And are we sure that they don't? It's not going to be funding government or any other nefarious actors. Perhaps we pay less attention to some of the qualitative dimensions, like does the local actor have acceptance in the community where they're meant to be operating? Do they have really the technical capability beyond what's there in the profile? Do they implement their policies and systems as well as just as having them? How do they work with communities? What's the actual approach? Is their budget equitable as well as overall program budgets between internationals and nationals? And what are the modalities to enhance? So I mean, lots of different things, but I suspect sometimes we're not engaging across the board, and there's many more than this. But for the two of you, when we say localization, one of the most overused and perhaps under-implemented meaningfully terms in South Sudan, what comes to mind?
For me, straight away, what comes to mind, now that you are trying to explain the meaning or some of the elements you've mentioned, I actually tell myself, maybe I don't know what localization is, because often when I talk of localization, immediately my mind runs to ownership, right? And now that you mentioned some of the few things, I'm now internalizing that and begin to question my understanding of what is localization. So I would say ownership.
And when you say ownership, what do you mean by ownership? Because let's not limit ourselves to this. This is more oriented around the...
So ownership, I don't have a short way to explain this, Rob, but I think when I talk of ownership, I would push it a little bit back in terms of the first agenda. When South Sudan, when the conflict between North and South stopped, let's say there is a influx of people coming back in 2005. So you find a lot of agencies, international agencies, the UN agencies coming in to support the process of resettlement or rebuilding of South Sudan. And in that sense, I immediately think of the fact that the original mandate or the objective of these international agencies or expatriates coming to South Sudan is to work alongside the South Sudanese people and the government so that eventually they become self-reliant or they become independent to take over some of the services that are being offered so they can own it in that process. So that's how I look at it in general. But something obviously didn't work right, because if we assess ourselves based on that, I don't know whether we can say we are meeting that agenda of localization.
So let's come back to what maybe hasn't worked right. Minigana.
To me, it's really putting national or grassroots institutions at the center of implementing programs, at the center of doing things for the communities where they have come from. And to me, for a long time, localization is a term that I struggled with a little bit because I've heard it a lot. And in most cases with programs that I have engaged with in the past, people will be talking about localization and just said, oh, we have this national organization we are working with. And to them really gets back to your point of just ticking the boxes, but people don't go into details of what does that really mean to the community. They just want to meet the donor criteria of having a national organization, or sometimes maybe having a national staff to represent the localization agenda. There's spaces where people say, oh, and we have 2 national staff. We have this number of national staff just to justify that they are implementing localization agenda, which I think is quite narrow in meaning compared to what I would imagine the initial conversation of localization was all about.
So just to drill in, maybe for the two of you personally, as South Sudanese working in different ways and across different periods with different organizations, what for you, let's take this ownership kind of characterization, what does that look like? Let's take a step back from the community for a moment to say organizational work for you as individuals. How would you describe what that looks like when it's happening, giving ownership to national personnel and so forth?
For me, Rob, I would probably say at the offset that some of the conversation or some of my thoughts could easily be misunderstood by majority. And if what I would say now triggers someone, then I think I'm right, because that's that is the essence of it. But what I want to say is that I think there is a bit of a change of attitude towards this agenda of the national or localization agenda. I always question myself a lot, and I've attempted to write stuff about it, but I sort of pull back. And the question is that when an international person, when they first see the job description, the motivation at the first time when they are coming into a country like South Sudan, the motivation, obviously, sometimes 90% of that motivation is to come and work alongside South Sudanese and support them. And this brings me to the meaning of localization. You are coming in to work with me so that eventually I would be able to, you impart some of the knowledge and the skills so that when you step aside, that I can run with whatever that needs. There is no gap in between. That's my very sort of definition of the thinking. But I feel that over time, when these international experts comes in, something changes, and I wanted to understand what that changed, that original motivation to sort of really support people or support the local to take over some of the services or do some of the work, that changes along the line. And I don't understand what that is changed. The motivation shift away from I'm helping to more personalized sort of motivation. It's all about, I'm securing my job, I'm working alongside. So for me, that's what it's very sad for me to say this today, but this is how sometimes I see people along the way coming in. But in the other hand, I can flip on the other side. We as national, I don't think we have also embraced this concept of localization fully, because there is a gap. So if I see that I need my capacity to be strengthened, for example, by you, Rob, then I should step into that space and question you. And I say, look, can you teach me how to do this? Can I do this? And for me, we have failed ourselves as well in terms of going out there and speak for ourselves in terms of the gaps that we see. So
Well, interesting perspective you brought. In as much as I agree with you, some of the international really come with a good intention to help, but also others are just coming for the job, right? That's the reality. And when we talk about ownership, what comes to mind is, I'm not looking at it really just in terms of the institutions having nationals, but the ideas, the approach of implementing activities, the approach of implementing interventions within the communities or in the different areas that people work with. Where does it come from? Is it an approach that is copy-pasted from somewhere? And then we are insisting that just because we have let a program, the same program in A and B country in this manner, it has to work the same way in South Sudan. So sometimes we find ourselves trapped in this box where sometimes institutions or programs that are introduced in South Sudan just copy something that has worked somewhere without taking the contextual differences into consideration. So localization in terms of content should also look at some of these issues of context to ensure that programs learn from the context that they're implementing in and adapt.
So a lot of programs would potentially be, if anyone's listening, would be listening and saying, oh, yeah, that's what we do. We go and we do our context analysis. We understand the communities. We discuss with the communities. We have our national staff who are able to contextualize what's being said for us, and then we work out what I'm giving the sort of generous characterization of it. So can you drill in a little bit? Like what is it that is missing in that kind of approach that's sometimes adopted? Because you will see in any program proposal a level of consultation that's involved. They'll talk about localization. They'll have national partners. So coming back to the tick boxes, we're getting to a point where the tick boxes are always being ticked, and yet, if I'm getting you correctly, there is still the perception of this gap in terms of the substance and the meaning. A little bit in the same way that we generally in South Sudan talk about 35% participation of women. So you increasingly find structures which have 35% representation of women, but it doesn't address the substantive point of what gives that actual life in practice. So what's missing?
It's quite difficult to nail it down, Rob, but I think what I'm thinking of is the power imbalance from the start when a national staff and the international staff are working together. Already, we come from a society that is very militarized. We, in our head, like in my mind, there's the issue of hierarchy. So we sit in the same table as we are. I wouldn't put forward my idea unless my supervisor, my manager, who often are from different, they're not local. So I would be following that lead. The second aspect of it, that if my manager, my supervisor, who is a non-South Sudanese, have said something, I'm not in a position to question that person because I'm afraid that what will that do with our relationship? So again, it's back again to the international staff to create a way on how they interact with the national, especially when they are talking about an activity that need a little bit of contextualization by the national. How you do that is quite important in a sense. So, but at the back of our mind is that hierarchy that I can't question my boss. I can't go against their thoughts because what will that do to my relationship with that person? So there's quite a lot in that that prevents someone national to come up. And the fear of losing my job too, because if I say I go against, I'm losing my job in MBA.
Indeed, job security is quite a big thing, especially now with less resources and few opportunities. I think it's also one big factor that is affecting openness in institutions. But also another element, sometimes, yes, the national staffs are there, but the question of accessibility, right? You have an institution that is based in Juba, and when they reach to the states, they may only be in the state capitals. So sometimes they don't even have more detailed data from hard to reach areas. So that can also impact the quality of the information that is shared and used for analysis. So that is also another obstacle to this whole conversation around incorporating context relevant information into programming.
So elements of power, elements of distance from where the relevant context and
Yeah. And also when we talk about the distance, we need to talk about institutional rules and policies in terms of like security procedures, where someone can go and where someone cannot go, because sometimes there'll be institutions where staff are willing to go into the hard to reach areas to be able to engage at that level to get that kind of information, but still the institutional policies that keep saying, oh, you need to go through this lengthy procedures so that you can be able to go to some of these places. So
and if I can add, Rob, also the element of the government was or is meant to set policies on how or define the relationship between the national and international staff, not necessarily at that level, but in terms of the mandate of the international organization, the UN, those need to be defined quite clearly. And that, I think there is a gap where there is sort of a loose, there's no proper, not strict, but there's no proper monitoring what is happening. So then you find the international organization and the UN stepping in and just go along and do what they want to do because government is not coming back to question them, right? Government is not coming back to say, look, we were meant to be doing this and you are meant to be doing that. So those aspects also play a major role. And I can't blame the international organization. Again, I'm contradicting myself now. The international organization and the UN, I can't blame them anymore because the government were meant to step in to the center. But now the government have reduced themselves to the position where they're just consulted. I'm going to X area and I am going to run this activity. what do you say? Yeah, it's all good, and then they're gone. Rather than drilling down, how did this program come about? What can we do as a government to support this? What is our role in it? And asking the question on sustainability and all those things that could lead towards the localization agenda. It's no one is doing that.
Yeah, and so you end up with the government almost treated as an inconvenience that sort of has to be managed on the side.
Yeah.
I spent some time engaged with the Australian government's work in Papua New Guinea, and Australia's had a long involvement and sort of across the board in different ways with Papua New Guinea stretching all the way back. And so it's a scenario where perhaps more than other places, you would expect there perhaps to be a level of imposition of policies and programs and so forth. And maybe there's some of that going on. But at some level, but coming to South Sudan, in contrast to that, it's shocking how little deference is given to government beyond the most kind of tokenistic sort of lip service that's paid to it. So it's interesting, what would it take to shift that? Because also then the response from the international side, which has been echoed over many years, would be, well, you need to have an actual government. What we need is to be able to see this and this and this in place, and then we can be engaging with government in a more meaningful and not perfunctory sense. So.
And that's, as a South Sudanese, this is a very difficult reality, or painful reality rather, to hear, right? Not reality, but a painful rhetoric to hear. And it brings me to question the international support that is being given to South Sudan. Over the years, we have seen a lot of accompaniment programs to government institutions, government ministries, through different donors, where sometimes they bring consultants, they have a couple of years project accompanying specific ministries to build capacities and all that. And I think I asked that question some 2 years back in a forum. If these donors have been accompanying the government institutions, they've been doing capacity building from 2005, before we became a country. Up to now, we're still talking about the same capacity. We're still talking about government institutions being non-existent, not being able to do the work. So maybe it's time for them to question themselves. What are they really doing, the donors? What are they really putting their money into? Is the problem their approach, how they design the intervention or their work with the government, or the problem is within the government? Because it's been years, somebody needs to answer this question. We cannot talk about capacity for forever. Yeah.
There's perhaps some parallels with what we're engaging with in terms of national NGOs, where we've been saying, look, you need to structurally, in order to meaningfully over time develop the capacity of national NGOs, you need to create stability for people. It needs to have competitive salaries. It needs to have components that will retain people and attract people. And similarly with government, we know that particularly at those administrative levels, not the political appointments perhaps so much, salaries aren't paid, they're paid late, they're minimal. So it strikes me as quite odd, even as an outsider, and odd is perhaps a polite way of putting it, that you would potentially bring a consultant who's got a package of $200,000 a year to work in line in a ministry with South Sudanese who haven't been paid properly for 6 months. So, I mean, I'd be interested how you feel about these kinds of dynamics, because on the outside, I feel like irrespective of the design you have in place or the ideas you might want to be bringing, maybe it relates back to power in some sense. There's such a disparity that at the level of the collective psyche, it doesn't fly.
It doesn't.
It doesn't, to be honest, Rob, it comes down to also, I'm coming back to the government here, asking the right questions, right? So, and are the international organization willing to be honest enough to enter some sort of a conversation? So if I'm a minister for education, for example, and you are seconded to my ministry, usually you come with the term of reference, right? Within that term of reference, how do we have a conversation, me as a minister and you, in terms of what you will do? So I need to look into that. And part of the term of reference is it to build the capacity of my team, right? And if it is, then I need that to be spelled out quite clearly. I think part of it is that the intention that I mentioned earlier, the original intention is almost quite good. However, when the job becomes very difficult, the international sort of resort to, oh, I can just do it, it will be more quicker than saying it's painful to take these people through a certain step so that I can also pass the skills and the knowledge to them. It's a very painful process. And so someone would just say, oh, I could, a work that could take an hour, it could possibly take a whole day if you were to take people through it. So then again, it comes down to individuals' attitudes. Although I have my TOR, then as an individual that are coming in, what is that legacy when I walk away? What is it that I want to to leave behind with the national that are working alongside me, that I would want? The reality is, we want, as a international, they want to put themselves in a position where they could lose their job. That is the best outcome for South Sudanese, which means that the national we literally do everything that you do. And so then at the end of the day, you look around and say, actually, I have no use here. But then, what is the beauty of that? When you come to the point where you say, I have no use here, and let me walk away, you will go to the airport very proud man or a woman, because you know you've done something, and that is the legacy. But we forget that. It's about securing jobs. It's about resources, competition, and how can I prolong the issues. I'm not sure whether I can't back it up with evidence, but I hear sometimes some international organization or UN, they misrepresent South Sudanese issues, because the more issues are sent, let's say perhaps to New York, and the terrible they read, the longer they are kept in the country. I don't know whether that is true, but if that is true, then that is really, it's really bad.
I've actually been in meetings where, unfortunately, it was so high level that I am not in a place to be able to share my thoughts. So I just had to sit there and listen. And I heard that person talking about South Sudan. In my mind, I was like, wait a minute, is this the same country that I live in? Is this the Juba that me and you live in that you're describing? And I remember my colleague, when we got out of that meeting, we really had to tell our colleague who is like higher up, to explain to her that don't believe everything you've heard from that meeting. So like really, they are people, they're internationals who really use this negative rhetoric to continue selling these rhetorics about South Sudan. Very unfortunate. And coming back to the government, it's very unfortunate that sometimes when the governments negotiate with some of these donors, already they're negotiating from weaker positions, right? Because you have these institutions that don't have resources. You can be an undersecretary or minister, but you're underfunded. You cannot even support the staff that work for you. So you're just trying to go for any deal or any agreement with a donor or with an international that can bring some resources to make you move things in your institution. So that puts them in a place where sometimes they cannot even negotiate the TOR of some of the consultants that are being brought into the institution. So these consultants will come and do whatever they think is relevant. And when it gets hard, like you say, they don't want to put in the work, they don't want to go through the hard process. They will just do it to be able to, in most cases, it's a report to be submitted at the end of their contract, right? And to say, I have worked with this institution and this is the final report of my work. It doesn't matter if this report is really generated through adequate work that is being done with the people, or it's me sitting down, taking a couple of hours to generate this report and submit, which is very unfortunate. I met one person that I know. He was a consultant in one of the government institutions he was attached. And I met him in Addis, and for some reason he told me, I was in South Sudan and I have developed a policy for this and this ministry. It was so funny. I laughed in my heart because I was part of that process where I used to work, we were also supporting the same ministry in developing one of these policies, but he took all the credit for something that he has not done, to be a work that he has done. So if someone who has not known him or interacted with that ministry will definitely believe him and anything that he says about that ministry. So unfortunately, sometimes there are false narratives that are being
So in 2013, as an example, just sort of a reflection of what this agenda or localizations is in real play. So in 2013, very quickly, a lot of the international organization and staff had to go back wherever they came from, and you are left with only national organization. And because the international organization have all left all their staff, then all the services were shut down. And what that means is that there are no services to people. Imagine if the international or the UN were confident enough if the focus has been to build the capacity and strengthen the locals, then in a scenario like that, when an international staff leaves, then the work should continue. But in 2013, basically, I wish I have the data, but in 2013, it was just terrible because everything came to stand still because everyone left the country. And then therefore, the whole country just went fully stop.
But I mean, to that point, is it really like building the capacity of the local or taking the step to trust the locals to try to fill in the gap, and then you monitor from wherever you are to be able to say, well, this is where you're doing it right, this is not where you're doing it right, because you cannot just say, just because we're not here, you cannot do this. Like, give them an opportunity to prove you wrong. And I think it has happened with other institutions where the locals, that is maybe pretty much in 2016 when people had to also go, the institutions that have also given some level of autonomy to their local staffs, and they have done pretty well. Yeah.
Part of it links to this question of compliance and the international and donor, is it unfair to say obsession with compliance? That so much emphasis in terms of what the incentives are towards compliance that we tend to forget perhaps that actually compliance is only meant to be a means to an end, not an obstruction in the way of achieving impact. And this has been seen anecdotally in other parts of the world as well, even in some of the more recent humanitarian responses where you had very able national, local, informal groups that were ready and competent to respond to the needs, but international agency bureaucracies which were unable to release funds to those groups that were in position to make that difference. So there's these structural components to it. And then coming back to the consultants, the famous consultants, and it's not just consultants though, that are in this time frame. So you were talking about how it, David, takes time to go through processes, and these are just the processes we should acknowledge that maybe are useful from the outside, and there are plenty which probably aren't, which it serves no purpose to kind of propagate throughout South Sudan. But let's take the ones that potentially are. It takes time to orient people around this stuff, and therefore patience, right?
Yeah.
And but who has the patience if I'm on a 6-month contract to transform a ministry, or if I'm on a 2-year posting for X, Y, and Z it's quicker and more efficient if I know how to do it, or at least I think I know how to do it. So how do we create? I mean, when has there ever been a consultancy that's indefinite? Someone coming on one tasking for 4 or 5 years. I mean, it's even the thought of it is crazy compared to what we have at present. But when you think about how long some of these processes take, that's what potentially would be required. But creating the space for that, I got feedback just the other day from someone that, in a certain scenario, I thought I had the answer. I cut them off from giving their explanation of what they thought was the situation. And because I thought I knew what the situation was and didn't need to be distracted by some alternative, version, and that was received as, coming back maybe to your PowerPoint as well, that was received as, oh, okay, this is how Rob operates, and so I better just shut up, which wasn't the intention as well. So there's all these different dynamics to navigate, but how to create the space and the sense of taking it one step at a time, but actual steps. Okay, great. So we've made it a certain way into this conversation, and there's still plenty more to discuss. Let's put it on pause for this episode, and we'll come back in the next episode with more to say about localization and value for money.
Great.